The Giants' pitching, which was really hurt last year by the defense, is going to have a lot to say about whether they can get back to the postseason in 2023.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on today's show, we're going to discuss my predictions for the opening day roster for their pitchers. Yesterday, we looked at the position player mix. I had one hot take mixed in there, and there were some other questions as well. There's some uncertainty at catcher, first, third. But looking at the pitchers, the Giants made some moves here. They ultimately brought in 4 pitchers, one of whom is likely to start the season on the 60-day injured list. So we'll get into everybody in just a minute. So just jumping right in, the starting rotation. This is where the Giants got really deep because they lost Carlos Rodon. So obviously he's not going to be there. He'll be standing opposite of them on opening day on the, one of the lines at Yankee Stadium. But for the Giants, like I said, their pitching got kind of overshadowed by the defense last year. If you actually look at the results based on like fielding independent pitching, the Giants were first in the National League last year in fielding independent pitching by their whole pitching staff, including their relievers who were like 20 something, 20th plus in earned run average. And so the defense really skewed things and kind of took away from the fact that a lot of their pitchers, it's kind of crazy when we look at guys who had quote unquote down or bad years like Alex Wood, even like Jacob Junas's final results. The fielding independent numbers are just so much better than the actual results. And so if the team can play better defense, which is a question, but I think that they went from atrocious to maybe mediocre, and I think we're kind of underrating that that's improvement. Even though mediocre is nothing to get excited about, I think mediocre would be enough with some of the guys on this staff. So without further delay, I think the ace of this staff, there's no question right now, is Logan Webb, who himself wasn't hurt by the defense in terms of the actual results, in terms of like run prevention versus the kind of under the hood numbers. So Logan Webb last year had a 2.90 ERA. The fielding independent pitching was 3.03, so in the neighborhood, but even a little higher. He's pretty much unique in that regard on this team. We're going to look at guy after guy who had the fielding independent numbers much better than the results-based numbers. But for Webb, it's 2 consecutive seasons here where he put up an ERA right around 3 or a little below even. The last 2 years combined for Webb, a 2.96 earned run average and a 2.90 fielding independent pitching. Always nice when those two numbers kind of are right in line with each other, and that's kind of the case here with Webb over the last 2 years combined. The real strength of Logan Webb is this really high 58.4% ground ball rate that he's accumulated over the last 2 years combined. League average is going to be in the low 40s, and Webb is up around 60% in terms of when the ball is hit in play, how often is it a ground ball? And for Webb, it's about 60% of the time, which is, it helps him limit home runs, and that keeps runs off the board. Big strikeout rate decline for Logan Webb from 2021 to 2022. That's something I'm a little bit concerned about. Hopefully, he can rebound in the strikeout department in 2023. Went from 26.5% in 2021 down to 20.7% in 2022. So that was a below average strikeout rate in 2022. He also did lose some velocity on the fastball from 92.9 average velo on the sinker, I suppose, in 2021 to 91.9. So a whole mile per hour off the fastball. So that's something I'll be looking for, hopefully, to rebound in 2023. And just one last point about Logan Webb is that he is under club control for 3 more seasons, counting this year. And so there's all this talk about will they extend him? Hopefully they do, but if they don't, they still have him for this year and then 2 more years after that. So the next player, the guy I think who would be starting second right now on the San Francisco Giants is going to be Alex Cobb. And he is just the pinnacle of what I'm talking about here, with the fielding independent numbers being so much better than the results-based numbers. So for Cobb, last year, I mean, it was a healthy year for the most part. He went down kind of early in the year with like a hamstring or something. And the results were just not there. He looked like so unlucky in the first couple months of the year, but things kind of stabilized for him in the last 4 months or so of the season. And when all was said and done, Alex Cobb had a 2.80 fielding independent pitching. And what this number suggests, by the way, it's predicting what your ERA will be. And for Cobb, I mean, 2.80, that's better than Logan Webb. It's up there among the leaders in the sport, basically. But for Cobb, I mean, his actual ERA was almost a run higher at 3.73. And the expected ERA, which is just another data point here, which kind of looks at the quality of the contact against you. It looks at the strikeout rate you're getting, the walk rate you're getting, and produces an expected ERA. And that expected ERA was much closer to that fielding independent pitching. It was 3.15. And again, the ERA ended up being 3.73. So for Cobb, I mean, he's like Logan Webb in a lot of ways. The ground ball rate last year for Cobb, 61.5%. That's one of the best in the sport. But like I said, with Webb, who had a below average strikeout rate, Cobb came in with a strikeout rate of 23.9%, a little bit better than average. So way better ground ball rate than normal. One of the best in the sport, like Logan Webb. These guys are really similar when you look at just kind of the results that they get. But for Cobb, the results were that they didn't convert the balls that should have been outs into outs enough. But if they can, we're looking at a guy who's a legit number 2 starter in my eyes. Like, forget the track record, forget that he's 35 and whatever, and just look at that basically FIP and what could be. I mean, he induced so much weak contact. His average fastball velocity, speaking of Webb's going down, Alex Cobb's was a career best in 2022. His average fastball was 94.8 miles an hour, up from a career average of around 92. So he gained like 3 miles an hour on his fastball. And he's thrown his splitter 90 miles an hour, which is kind of close to what his career fastball velocity was. And so Cobb in the offseason last year worked with, Driveline, and just gained velocity and was, at times hitting upper 90s with his power sinker and throwing a nasty split and mixing in a curveball as well. And so I'm really hopeful on Alex Cobb. I mean, health is going to be a question. It's always been a question for him. But he had a healthy year last year for the most part, like I said. And just the under-the-hood numbers are so intriguing for Alex Cobb that I'm excited about what he can bring in 2023. So coming up in just a minute, we're going to talk about the rest of the rotation and the bullpen for the Giants. They've got some new guys. Where do Sean Manaea and Ross Stripling fit in with the Giants pitching staff in 2023? We'll get into it in just a minute. But before we do, this episode is brought to you by Built Bar. Are you looking for a delicious treat, but you don't want all the fat and calories? You've got to try a Built Bar. We just got through the holidays, and I know one of my personal goals is always to eat a little bit healthier, and Built is just the tool for you if that's what you're looking to do, because you do not have to compromise on taste. We're talking about candy bar-esque flavor and deliciousness, and yet an incredibly healthy profile with, in a typical bar, just about 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. And now you don't have to wait around to get a box either. We've been talking for years about going to Built.com, but now you can go to your local Walmart or Sam's Club as well. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today, walk over to the pharmacy section, and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. Or if you're close to Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box with our hit flavors, brownie, batter, and churro. You can thank me later. All right, as promised, we are going to continue running through these pitchers. Those are kind of the two head honchos for the Giants, and of course, there's young pup Kyle Harrison waiting in the wings, and he could very much factor in this season somewhat early, even in the season. And then all of a sudden you'd be looking at, I mean, the underlying numbers, like just forget who Alex Cobb is, the track record. He's been in the league a long time. He's a different guy with that change in velocity and just some of the numbers. Man, a good defense behind Cobb. And you might say they don't have a good defense. Well, I think that they improved enough to be okay. And also there just seemed to be some element of luck last year all the way around. And it was not good luck. Giants the balls just fell everywhere where there wasn't a guy, the hitter would hit it there. It really, really affected Cobb in a major way. And I just wouldn't expect, it was like a 10th percentile outcome for Cobb. And hopefully we just get some rebound to some normal luck, and also just hopefully the team plays some better defense. It's all hope for now, but I think that they certainly could do that. It seemed like everything that could go wrong did go wrong in this regard last year. Thanks for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Locked On MLB Prospects host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. So yes, we got to move through the rest of these starters. This is where, when we talk about depth, the Giants have it here with their starting pitching depth. Because beyond Webb and Cobb, they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, like arguably 5 additional starters. And I've already named 2, right? So let's talk about the new guys. First of all, getting to Ross Stripling. So Ross Stripling, obviously a Dodger for several seasons, spent the last couple years in Toronto, and then last year specifically, Ross Stripling just had a really nice year in Toronto. Pitched 134 innings and ended up with a 3.01 ERA. That's Logan Webb territory in terms of run prevention. Well, you might say, oh, did he get lucky? Not necessarily. I mean, the fielding independent pitching was 3.11. The expected ERA was a bit higher at 3.57. And his strikeout rate was around Logan Webb's. He's really a command guy. I mean, just a 3.7% walk rate last year, really low. He also prevented home runs really well last year, but that's not something he's always done in his career. And so year to year kind of home run rates are not always sustainable. And so we'll see if he is able to continue to prevent home runs at a good rate in 2023. He's also a guy who kind of seemingly sports, below average batting average on balls in play against him. So someone who maybe induces more weak contact than the typical guy. And so he's an interesting pitcher in that he's got one really, really good pitch, and the other pitches maybe aren't so special, but the changeup is the calling card for Stripling. And yeah, I mean, it's a very modest deal here, 2 years, $25 million with an opt-out after the first year, and coming off such a strong year. He's just like a depth guy. And so he's one of these guys who can be good. I would never expect like ace. He's not going to dominate. I think last year is kind of the best case scenario where the strikeout rate was below average, but the run prevention was excellent. And the worst case scenario is, he's had a couple times in his career where he's had an ERA closer to 5 and, home run rate over 2 per 9 innings. So that's the worst case. The best case is last year. And it's kind of like fits into that Alex Wood, Anthony DeSclafani category where they're not frontline guys, but they can be really solid pitchers, as we'll discuss with Wood and the 1 great, 1 down year that he's had here. I think that's kind of the spectrum for Stripling as well. And then moving on to Sean Manaea, I think that he falls into that category as well. This guy was the ace of the Oakland A's for when they were good most recently. And so, he's had some really good seasons, but last year was one of those down years. I mentioned Stripling, worst case, he's had some ERAs around 5 a couple times, but that's what happened to Sean Manaea last year. So it happened at an unfortunate time for him, but he still was able to get that identical deal to Stripling, 2 years, $25 million with an opt-out after the first. So this is a guy who's been better than average at preventing runs in his career, but last year ERA of 4.96, fielding independent pitching of 4.53, expected ERA of 4.05. So it wasn't a good year for Sean Manaea, but there is talent in the tank. Like I said, he's a guy, he's had some really nice years. I mean, in 2018, 160 and 2/3 innings and a 3.59 ERA. Even in 2021 with the A's, made all his starts, seemingly 32 starts, strikeout rate of 26%, better than average there, ERA of 3.91, fielding independent pitching of 3.66. So again, they've just got a lot of these kind of mid-tier starters, mid-rotation type starters, and when you've got so many of them, I like the probability of a couple of them at least kind of hitting on their more positive outcomes. And maybe some of them don't, but then they have so much depth that those guys could move to the bullpen if need be. And that's going to have to be how it is to start the season, because they've got more pitchers than they've got places for in the starting rotation, more starters than they have spots for in that rotation. So moving on, it's just two more guys who fall into this category, but they're a little more familiar. Next one being Alex Wood. And by the way, I see it mentioned all the time. Manaea and Stripling, identical, 2-year, $25 million deals. Well, guess what? Alex Wood signed a 2-year, $25 million deal a year before those two. And so they've got a type and a sweet spot for these kind of deals. And for Wood, when he got this deal, he was coming off a nice 2021 season in which he had a 3.83 earned run average with the Giants, a 3.48 fielding independent pitching. But then he followed it up with a 5.10 ERA in 2022. So a disappointing year for Wood. But when we look at the fielding independent pitching, it was much, much lower at 3.76. So we're talking like almost a run and a half difference between his fielding independent pitching predicting the ERA at 3.76 and the actual ERA at 5.10. So similar kind of story. He's a guy who gets ground balls, had an above average strikeout rate, commands the strike zone. The results just weren't there for Alex Wood. And so he's a guy I look for to kind of rebound. And he had trouble going through an order a third time. And so with so much depth, I would imagine they limit that a little bit more, because they figure to have guys who are like starting pitcher types in the bullpen, maybe even a couple of them. And so that would allow you to like piggyback, just let Alex Wood go through a couple times and then bring in, Anthony DeSclafani and let him go through an order a couple times. And so I think that's something where, assuming guys are healthy, you're probably going to see some of that, limiting that third time through the order kind of bugaboo with Alex Wood. So and this is the last year of Wood's contract of that 2-year deal. The next guy is Anthony DeSclafani. So he got himself a 3-year deal, and year one was a disaster. He had a 6.63 earned run average, only through 19 innings last year before needing season-ending ankle surgery. I think people sleep on the fact that DeSclafani had a 3.17 ERA in 2021, and then I see a lot of like just cut him loose and stuff like that, which doesn't make any sense to me. You're putting all your stock into the 5 games in which he pitched last year versus the 31 starts he made in 2021 when he had a 3.17 ERA. And they're not paying this guy to be a frontline starter. If he's like your 4th or 5th starter, a guy who has the potential to put in a low 3s ERA, that is a good thing. And, I'm looking forward to him coming back and hopefully being healthy and being the guy he was more so in 2021 than the guy he was in 2022. He's just a guy who has a track record of being a solid arm, if not spectacular. And hopefully he can rebound, but there's not going to be a lot of pressure on him to do it because they have so much depth here. And so with so many of those guys after Webb and Cobb, I think that they all kind of fall into a similar category, and that it's somewhat high probability that 2 or 3 of them kind of reach that potential and that they don't just all have down years. That would be unfortunate and unlikely in my opinion. So there's another guy even, I think DeSclafani, who has 2 years left on his deal, counting this year, probably goes into the bullpen to start so they can manage the workload a little bit more perhaps. And there's another guy in Jacob Junis who had a nice year to start for the Giants in 2022, kind of fell off at the end, but he projects into that bullpen as well. So we'll get into the bullpen mix in just a minute. But before we do, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use, and you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores to threes drained. So for me, I'm looking at the Warriors right now, and they are big underdogs tonight at the Los Angeles Clippers. +8 is the point spread for the Warriors, and so I don't know. you can consider this for yourself. The over-under at 228.5. The Warriors heavy underdogs, like I said, at plus 275. So that's what I'm looking at for today. And FanDuel even lets you combine bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet for up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, here we go. We're going to run through the bullpen, I guess, somewhat quickly here. I think DeSclafani projects into that bullpen, which is interesting when you start putting starters in the pen. It deepens out everything. And so I think it's a really strange but possibly effective strategy that the Giants have undertaken this year. We've got teams like the Padres. They just signed Michael Wacha, but they had their three big starters, Darvish, Snell, and Musgrove. And then two guys who have been relievers projected into the starting rotation. This is the opposite of what the Giants have here, which it's much preferred to be in the Giants situation. The Padres, I don't know what they're thinking with that, but they do sign Wacha today, and so that lengthens it out a bit. But the Giants still appear much deeper than the Padres and the Dodgers even. So Jacob Junis is another guy in the mix here, and he had stretches last year where he looked like one of their better starting pitchers. So he's kind of in that same mold, but maybe I'm a little less confident in him than I am in some of the others just because he doesn't ever really have that track record of being an above average pitcher in any capacity, really. He's mostly been a starter in his career, and so moving him to the pen, perhaps that works out. And he was so good before he kind of had some injuries and then fell off. But again, though, the ERA was 4.42 when all was said and done, but the fielding independent pitching was 3.65. The expected ERA was kind of midway between those two, or even a little higher than midway at 4.17, but he's not a high strikeout guy. He did do pretty well at preventing homers. I don't know. We shall see. I think he's a nice kind of long man to have, and they figure to have a couple of them, and I'm projecting DeSclafani and now Junis into that bullpen. And so the rest of the bullpen, let's start with the top guys. Camilo Doval just had an excellent season in 2022. And to me, it was a major turning point in his career in about mid-July when he started throwing a sinker. And this sinker became such an effective pitch, and I said it immediately, and it just came true, that it unlocked the whole arsenal for him. The slider and the four-seam fastball just played so much better when the sinker was working, and he ended up throwing the sinker a ton, just sinker after sinker after sinker. It's upper 90s, and it induced like the lowest average launch angle against it of any pitch in the majors, pretty much. For even though it was a small sample, of course, he was just a ground ball machine, and so his final ground ball rate for the season was a way above average 56.4%, and the strikeout rate an above average 28%. Struggles with command at times, but I'm just really optimistic about Doval. He's only 25 years old. He turns 26 in July. But I don't know. I just think the sinker completely unlocked his arsenal. It allowed that at times 103 mile an hour fastball to play better because the results early in his career, the first couple years, when it was just fastball slider, were that the hitters were hitting that fastball despite its velocity. But when you add that movement running in on a righty, they have to be aware of that. And then the one that's a little straighter, even with some cut sometimes, is just a surprise. And the added velocity is more effective. And that slider has always been a great pitch. And so I think that Doval has the potential and perhaps even likely potential to be one of the top relievers in the sport. And so great developmental success story so far. And hopefully it continues in 2023. Really optimistic there. And then they bring in Taylor Rogers, who is a high-end kind of lefty reliever. He's had some struggles with results at times. Like last year, the ERA was 4.76, but his fielding independent pitching was 3.31, so vastly underperformed the expected numbers, essentially. And he's just a strikeout guy, strikeout rate of 31% last year. He pounds the strike zone very consistently, and he keeps the ball in the ballpark. And so he's just a guy who has at times, and even throughout the course of his career, run batting average on balls in play that are worse than normal. And so we'll see if he can get that under wraps with the Giants. But projections are and overall in his career results are that he's one of the better relievers in the game. So I think that those two at the back end of games is kind of something you're going to see a lot. And then beyond that, I think that Tyler Rogers is obviously in that mix too. He's underrated. If you look at his results, and consistently he's good at preventing runs, gets a ton of ground balls. Giants have a type here, ground ball pitchers. Their defense was a problem, but it was largely in the outfield last year. They definitely had some bad luck and some bad timing with defensive issues in the infield, but getting ground balls is always a good thing. It'd be nice if they could convert more of them into outs this year. So the other relievers I have here, John Brebbia had a nice season with the Giants. Scott Alexander had a nice September with the Giants and figures into that mix, although he's frequently been hurt in his career. And then beyond that, there's essentially just one more spot if we're going with a 13-man pitching staff. Luke Jackson was another signing, big part of the Braves bullpen when they won that World Series in 2021. He's going to start the year on the injured list, but I expect good things out of Jackson when he comes back. And then I was saying Thomas Szapucki is out of options, and therefore I thought he was going to make this roster. But I have it on good authority that he's actually not out of options, despite unroster resource them saying that he is. And in that case, if he's not out of options, I think that you might see Cole Waits or RJ Dabovich crack this opening day bullpen. Both are kind of big right-handed arms drafted by this current regime. Cole Waits became the first guy drafted and developed by the current regime to play in the majors last year. So currently he's the only guy drafted and developed by this current regime. And Dabovich is another guy, and I think that either one of those two might, it could be Szapucki, but it also could be Waits or Dabovich. Waits is on the 40-man, Dabovich is not. So I'll go with Waits as my prediction here, since Szapucki apparently can be optioned. Anyway, that is my 13 pitchers, and that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On MLB Prospects. Host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. He recently talked about the Giants, so check it out. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot, so thanks in advance. And thank you to everyone who's done so already. I can't wait to be with you again 3 more times this week. We've got more mailbag questions coming up, and then pitchers and catchers reporting on Thursday. So anyway, thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.